Hello, everybody. Bit of an impromptu live today. Don't usually do this, but thought I'd give it a go on LinkedIn and see how it works. I've just finished an hour with Transport for New South Wales, where I was delivering a 1 hour guest speaker slot on how to thrive in change. And I documented the journey of planning for that session on my Instagram in a series of stories where I showed the process for developing content and for designing a structure for a session that serves that content and the audience, and then what it takes to set up and get ready. And I thought that if you on LinkedIn, my lovely live viewers, were also responsible for occasionally delivering presentations to others or for speaking or delivering masterclasses, you might find this useful also. So in the 10 minutes I've got before I go to school pickup, I thought I would have a chat with you about how I get ready for a presentation, what I include in the content, and what I think the most important kind of characteristics are for doing that well. So if you are jumping on this live and you've just seen it pop up and you thought, oh, this is interesting, then do feel free to jump into the comments and questions, and I will do my best to answer any of the curly queries that you send my way as we go. Otherwise, I will kick in to explaining how I prep for a session like this. So the first thing to do when you've got any presentation or speaking gig, in case you're wondering what my hand's doing, I'm patting my dog. The first thing you do when you've got a speaking gig or a presentation to do is to immediately dispense of your own nervousness or ego by getting in the heads of the people that you're coming to talk to. Most of the people who attend any kind of session that you run, whether it's at work or in person or online, are turning up with a whole bunch of stuff of their own that's already weighing on them. If it's in the middle of the day, they're probably squeezing it between other back-to-back meetings that they've got. If it's in a conference environment, they're probably worried about networking, wondering how they look, thinking about how they're going to participate in a way that makes it worth the money that they've spent or that their organisation has spent to send them. And so people are walking in with a whole bunch of their own stuff. Very few people turn up to a presentation or a meeting or a masterclass with the goal of judging you or of making any determinations of how good you are. They assume that if you're the one who's speaking, then you're worth listening to, right? You've got an assumption of credibility simply by being there, but they've got a lot of their own stuff clouding their ability to turn up. So the first thing you can do as a speaker in that situation is to think about, there's my dog, is to think about what the reality currently is for the people who you're speaking to. Are they nervous? Are they busy? Are they tired? Are they overwhelmed? Are they already thinking about the good questions that they could ask to look good? Are they nervous that they don't know anything about what you're talking about and they're going to look stupid? Have a think about where they're at. In the presentation that I just delivered, I knew that the people who were arriving were really busy. I knew that they were really feeling just the strain of constant change that has been taking place in their organisation and in their broader operating environment. And that the best thing I could do as a speaker for them was to be attuned to that stress and that overwhelm and to give them something light and something useful that recognised and validated how they were currently feeling. So that's my number one piece of advice for when you start to plan, is to think in service from the outset. Where are they at now? And then where do I want them to be when they leave? And so when I start planning a session, I always take out like an A3 or an A2 piece of paper and I write the name of the session on the top, but then I write what the goals are on there, right? And so my goals for that session, for that one in particular, were for people to feel better about the change that they were currently grappling with, to feel more confident in how they show up and manage that, and to feel as though they can support their teams. And so I want them to leave feeling as though they understand things better and as though they've got the ability to do something with that information. And my whole session is then targeted toward, have I addressed how people are feeling? Have I provided some explanation or context for why they feel the way they do so that they feel less alone? And then have I given them something useful to leave with? Now, one of the more common mistakes I see from people that do these kind of masterclasses or presentations is that they have a laundry list of different things that you can do or change as a result of the content that's been delivered. And I actually don't think you need to be as comprehensive as you think you do. You're more likely to prepare too much content than not enough. And if you think about books you've read, articles you've read, courses you've done, conferences you've attended, the best ones are those that left you with just one or two really good nuggets that you could go forth and work with. Everybody's just looking for their one golden piece of insight. They don't actually need you to solve all of their problems or to give them a comprehensive step-by-step of what needs to happen next. They just need a spark, something that's going to shift their thinking. And so my goal for any kind of workshop or presentation is that everybody leaves with something. And ideally, I'll ask them what that something is before they go so that they're really clear on it too. All right, so you're getting ready to plan a session. You've got a basic kind of idea what it's about, and you've put some thought into where the people who are attending are currently at. What do they need? What do they feel like coming in? What do they need to feel like going out? The mechanics of actually planning a session, I think, are quite simple. And in my approach, I use a structure that asks for an intro, which is never more than a few minutes. I have a section on why. And so the why in this particular situation is always, why does this matter? Right? Why is this a relevant thing for you to be currently doing with your time? And the best way to do that, the best way to include a why section at the start of anything you're doing is to ask a question, right? You could explain to people in a 20-point slide, bullet pointed slide, all the reasons why this is important. You can say, welcome to my Agile Continuous Improvement workshop. Here are 8 reasons why you should care. Or you can say, what's currently happening in your work environment? How are you feeling? Why would it be useful for things to be more streamlined around here? How would your work life change if we had better integration of our systems or we worked better together? Right? And people will tell you. And once they've told you, they believe it. And so always start with why. Simon Sinek knows what's up. So I have 5 minutes on intro, 10 minutes on why for this particular session. The bulk of any speaking gig or presentational masterclass is then always for me dedicated to the how. So if we have connected with each other, so the introduction is all about connection. If we've agreed why this is important, and so therefore we're listening, because remember, if they don't know why, they don't care how, then we can talk about how this works. And for me, that is always about explaining what this thing's about and how it fits together. So the presentation I just did was about thriving through change. We kicked off by talking about why it's difficult to lead when you are trapped in the operational overwhelm, why it's hard to feel good about your job when you are just fighting fires and really down in the weeds, and how useful it is when you can channel some perspective and think differently and zoom out. So we'd already done that. And then we moved into the how, which is, how does good change leadership work? What does it look like? What are the ingredients that we need to be aware of? What is the framework that we're going to use to understand the conversation we're having? And there are lots of different ways you can do that. For this particular session, I used a 3-part Venn diagram, which is just the most classic way of explaining how anything fits together. And I talked about 3 Ps. So I said, look, when it comes to how we be cool with change, there are kind of 3 main variables, and only one of them we have much control over. So the first one is you, who you are, how you show up. The second one is it, the change itself. You've got very little agency over that. And the third one is the other people who are involved, who it affects or who are engaged in it. And so out of you, it, and them, you can really only control you, but you also have some leverage around the intersects. And so for the intersection between you and it, we talked about perspective, right? How you can be more pragmatic, how you can get a useful sense of how important this really is in the grander scheme of things. For the intersection between you and them, we talked about presence, how you show up as a leader, the language that you use, the approach that you take. And for the intersection between it and them, which we were careful to make the point you had minimal control over, but that you do set the tone, we talked about progress. So how do we focus on the gain rather than the gap? How do we look backwards to move forwards? And so by providing that kind of overview of these are the ingredients of our topic, this is how it fits together, we've given people the scaffolding they need to then take on advice or take on action points and see how it slots in. If we just jump from why, here's why this matters, straight down to what you can do, there's a piece missing because people don't know how to decide where to direct their energy or what they most need to work on or the impact of the decisions and the actions and the choices that they take. So we've got to spend our time on the how. And honestly, I think that's the real value of any kind of subject matter expert presentation or workshop or masterclass is, hey, I can see, because I spend my time thinking about this, I can see how this works. I can see how it fits together. And I'd like to show you, right? That's massive value. And people will draw for you 3-part Venn diagrams that they saw 5 years ago if it had a lasting impact on them. So your how is the bulk of it. And for me, it was 5-minute intro, 10-minute why. We then spent about 25 minutes on the how, right? It was really the bulk of the presentation because that's what people needed, was sense making. We follow that with the what. So we start with why, we move into how. Then they're primed for what. And so the what is the actionable stuff that we're either asking of people or that we're giving them as advice. So if this is a work presentation for you, your what might be about, here's what I need you to do, or here's what needs to change, or here's what you need to do differently. And the presentation that I was giving just now, it was about what are the steps you can take, or the tools you can use, or the strategies you can apply to make this framework work for you. And we just had one for each of our P's, right? Remember, perspective, presence, and progress. And we had one handy dandy tip for each of those P's about the questions we can ask to channel perspective and a strategy we can use to prepare for disaster so that we're being pragmatic about how things are likely to play out. Some useful advice around language and approach when you are leading others through change, and then tools that you can use to reflect on progress that you've already made so that you can look forwards to move backwards. And none of it is earth-shattering. None of it is the most amazing stuff you've ever heard, but it's helpful because what it does is it validates the experience of the people who are there. It alleviates their stress and neurosis about whether or not they're the problem and whether this is actually something bigger, which it generally always is. And then it says, hey, here's a wee nugget for you. I hope you can use this afternoon. And so my workshop planning really focuses on title, goals, intro, and then why, how, and what. In terms of planning the content for that, you'll see there's not much on there. There's just a few post-it notes with some key points. And I think that's really important because nobody wants to hear you read a script. Nobody wants to watch you read bullet points off a PowerPoint slide. What they really want is to be confident that you know your stuff, which you should be too. And then they just need an engaging human experience as they make sense of what you've got to say. The more detail you pack into thinking about exactly what you'll say and how you'll say it, the more you will lose that human connection. And so for me, a post-it note will be, all right, I'm going to start with a story. I know what that story is, and there's a point at the bottom. I'm going to move into a question that people can then mull over to think about how that applies for them. And then I'm going to offer a live and interactive exercise for them to immediately apply that thinking into their own life. When I move into my 3 Ps, you'll see that there are originally 4, but I decided I could condense it to 3. I'll then write some really basic notes for each of those, right? What you can ask, what you can do, just a couple of notes. And then I wrap up by generally making people feel good and then leaving them with a question for them to ponder, which for this one was, what can you focus on next? And so with that really simple kind of structure, introduction, why, how, what, close, and with some really basic talking points chucked on post-it notes where the visual is a useful way of making sure you've got your spread right. When you write a script or a PowerPoint presentation, you'll probably find that you focus too much on what you're going to tell others. And what's useful about using this particular structure, and usually I would color code my post-it notes, but my Post-it note supply is running a bit low, is that you can easily see just at a glance whether you've got a good spread of stories, information, questions, and exercises or interactions. And if you look at your A3 piece of paper and there's only one exercise on there or one question, then your balance is off, because that's not an engaging session, that's just a lecture. And so what I like about chucking it up like this is then I can refer to it and have it here next to me on the screen while I'm going, so that I can be in my structure in mind. And to also make sure that I don't get trapped in the trap of just speaking rather than asking good questions and providing the space for reflection and insight after those. So the basics for this really, I think, are quite simple. Think about others and what they need rather than what you've got to say. Make sure that you've got a sensible structure that will help people to make sense of your information. Start with why, explain how it works, then move into what they can do. Don't overplan content, but do make sure that you've created enough space for engagement. And then just put all your energy into being a nice, useful person, because you have the privilege of their presence and their time. You've been asked to make their life easier in some way by sharing information or an update, by teaching them something they didn't know before, or by giving them a useful message to dwell on. And so focus your energy there. Ask good questions, connect with what people in the audience need. And I guess the closing point for that, because I do have to go do school pickup now, is that you're probably going to plan too much. Like, people don't need to know everything you know. And you're probably going to run out of time. Because if you're speaking about something you're passionate about, just assume that you could talk about it all day. You probably can. So make sure that whatever you're doing, and this is the useful thing of a framework like a 3 Ps, can be easily broken into chunks so that you can speed up bits if you need to, or completely drop bits off. On that note, the presentation I just did had 3 Ps in it, and they only got 2, because the 2 that we spent time on were extremely useful, and they were spending time, the audience, connecting with that and thinking about how it applied to them. And adding an extra piece of content just to finish off what I'd planned wasn't in service for them. What was in service for them was connecting to the content and being able to do something with it. And so be prepared to finish your presentation before you finished everything you want to say, and instead gauge your success over whether people were validated, alleviated, and pointed in the right direction. All right, that is my very brief, here's how you plan for an engaging presentation session off the back of a presentation that I just did. I now have to go pick up my kids from school. Have a great afternoon, everyone.